Welcome to the Pre Nup, the wedding-obsessed podcast designed to help you plan your dream day. I'm your host, Adriana, and each week I'm joined by the industry's top professionals, celebs, influencers, and friends who are sharing their best tips, advice, and mistakes they've made so you don't have to. The Pre Nup is a Love Stories TV podcast. Whoever said diamonds are a girl's best friend never met her dog. Incorporating your dog into your wedding might feel as natural as incorporating your sister. You simply couldn't imagine your special day without your four-legged bestie there. But a lot goes into it that you might not have thought of. Today we have Veronica Silghigian, Chief Dog Lover of Pawfect For You, the premier wedding day pet care company, to answer all your burning questions and including your furry friends into your special day. Welcome, Veronica.
Thank you very much, Adriana. It is a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you here. When we first connected, you brought up the idea of doing an episode about incorporating your dogs into the wedding. And pessimist me was like, Veronica, I love the idea. I'm going to promote it to everyone. But I just don't know. I feel like it's pretty straightforward from a planner's perspective. I'm a no dog, no baby kind of girl, just for logistic purposes. And you were like, you gave me a little pushback, which I was so grateful for after we had a conversation. Mm-hmm. You're like, well, that's all we do. We take care of the logistics. We are literally a planner for the pet.
Yep, exactly.
So I was so happy. And then we talked for a while, actually. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, I'm dead wrong. This is going to be so great. People need to know about this.
I agree.
So I'll just preface this. I had one pet, Mickey. He was my goldfish when I was 6. And he did live for a long time. But that is the only pet I've ever had. I don't have a dog. So that deep connection, I mean, plenty of my friends' family have dogs that are family members of theirs. But I don't connect to it on that level. So I am the outlier. I am well aware of that. I think probably most of our listeners have a fluffy friend who they're obsessed with and they want in their wedding.
Exactly. And you're not necessarily the outlier. It really is. I mean, the statistic, one of the most recent statistics have been that I think it's 52% of couples own a pet before they get married. So
that's a lot.
It's still a lot. It's absolutely, but it's 1 in 2. So,
okay. Yeah. Is that owning a pet together or bringing a pet in, or is there not enough to support?
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's only that they own a pet together before they get married. And then there's a subset of that obviously want to include their pet in their day.
But so there's many more who are bringing a pet in. There's 52% that are bringing this little dog into their family. Okay, so that's a lot. I think that
it is. And a lot of planners, venues, photographers, vendors, they're all seeing the same thing where couples say oh yeah, I have a dog. I really want to include them.
Yeah.
And it's become so much more common where there's always that, like you said, it's kind of the, let me err on the side of caution. I've had a couple of bad experiences with it.
Yes.
I can see this going really, really bad.
Yes.
And let's err on the side of caution and just, why don't you get a cocktail sign with your dog? But
Totally.
Meanwhile, it's kind of a little bit disappointing for some people where they're like, no, I really want my dog there.
Yeah.
You know, you're paying a couple $1,000s for photos.
Mm-hmm.
Don't you just want a few? But then there is the wide gamut of all of the logistics that have to go into that. Like, where is the pet being picked up? Where is the pet being dropped off? What is the pet wearing? What treats and toys will get their attention for photos? Are we going to be outside? Is it raining? What happens if it rains? There's all these different questions that come into play as we get closer into that real detailed planning mode. And it's like, oh my God.
Yeah.
What do I do?
Yes. In a perfect world, you think, okay, yeah, Max is going to just be there with us. And he's such a good dog and he is this and that. And it's like,
yes.
No. You don't realize how much is going to go into it because people don't realize how much goes into it for themselves.
Exactly.
Let alone their dog. So in your experience, what percentage of couples do you find want to incorporate their dog into the wedding, or a rough number?
If I had to get a percentage of the industry, it's kind of hard because I mean, my aspect of it is from a smaller subset based on demographics, based on, because this business model works really well in a suburban city area, urban area. It doesn't work so well in the rural areas. And in a rural area, you can really rely on a friend or family member. And the way that you treat a pet when you're coming from a farm is much different than you treat a pet when you live in a city.
Totally.
So based on that, though, if I had to guess, I would say at least a little bit more than half of that 52% wants to include their dog in their wedding.
Yes.
And ultimately will some way or another. But it kind of depends on, you know, a variety of different factors. Logistics is a big part of it. Budget's another big part of it.
Yes.
So I'd say it's still a very high percentage. I mean, we're growing tenfold.
I bet you are.
Year over year. And we survived the pandemic. I only had 4 cancellations. We still did 20 weddings during the pandemic. I mean, it's
That's
just
crazy.
insane.
Yeah.
But the nice thing about sitting in this part of the industry too is that we're generally not part of the entire day or the entire event. And that's nice too, because there's a little bit of, some of my sitters complain about having downtime at the wedding, but there generally is a little bit of downtime, and we have to bake it in for some dogs.
Sure, of course.
So
I want to really start from the top for anyone who is looking to incorporate their dog in whatever that looks like. Like you mentioned, you know, some people it's putting your dog on the cocktail napkin and someone's watching them. And some of them, they're like, no, he's partying with us into the after party.
Yes.
So what are some of the options that you see, some of the common to most uncommon options for dog at the wedding?
So first and foremost, we've got to think about it from the dog standpoint.
Yes.
Is your dog good with people? I mean, if you have a dog that constantly, you know, you go out and wants to growl, lunge, not going to be good at a wedding.
Probably not.
And one of the nice things too about also being where we are in the industry, I stopped mandating meet and greets 6 years ago, because we're getting so much information about you, about your dog, about the logistics, everything else, but you're really not going to reach out to us if you thought you had a terrible dog.
Right.
I was doing all these meet and greets at when I first started, and then I was like, I'm just meeting good dogs. And every time I'm at a wedding, people are saying to me like, oh, this is so nice. My dog is terrible. My dog would do awful here.
Yeah.
Those people don't even entertain the idea.
Totally. And I think about that too. There's, I'm sure every stadium does it, but I'm a Phillies fan, and there's a night where you can bring your dog.
Yep.
Yeah. And all these people bring their dogs, and you can tell there's certain dogs that don't want to be there.
Yep.
I'm like, this is rude. Like, this is not fun for them either. And then some are thriving and doing great. But yeah, you have to know, as much as it's sentimental and you want them to be a part of your day, it's the same thing with kids. Like, some kids just are not going to fare well.
Yep.
So the first step is really assessing
your dog's behavior and personality.
Okay.
Now, if you think your dog is good with people and you think your dog might be good for certain aspects, and I have a lot of people that reach out too, and they're like, I'm just worried about the jumping. That is very common, and it's not a bad thing. That is absolutely something we have to consider. And I tell people to think about it this way. First and foremost, there's absolutely no way to replicate the scenarios of the wedding day ahead of time. So again, why a meet and greet doesn't work, but picture it from the dog standpoint. We are going to go into this with a 50-50. 50% of the dog's going to jump, 50% of the dog's going to be completely subdued, because again, think about it from their perspective. We're bringing them into a new environment. You've got all of the smells, grasses, flowers, trees of the environment, plus the florals you're bringing in, times hairsprays, hair gels, perfumes, cologne. Multiply that by the number of guests you have. You can get a very overstimulated dog that's like, oh my God, I got to go smell, sniff, and jump on everything. Or you have dogs that are just like, wow, and they kind of look a little bit high.
Totally, yeah. So that's so funny that you mentioned the sensory overload, because I have plenty of people mention certain guests to me that are like, this person needs to be seated in this area or have a special spot and cocktail, because they simply are not going to be able to handle it. So if you know that for even a person, like,
you know that for a dog then too.
You would have to, right? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So we want to assess whether they're even like in the capacity to be there.
Yep.
Another thing that I find often is venue. So I used to work in venues, and one of them was pretty lenient. The other one was very strict. No dogs, like a no dog policy. But their answer always was it goes against health code, which I don't know whether that's like BS just to avoid it. But do you deal with that a lot? Pushback from the venue?
Yes. And unfortunately, this is my play on words, but pet peeve of the industry too right now. I wish venues were a little bit more firm on their rules going into the whole thing. And I think I have seen a little bit of a shift with certain venues in terms of really outlining those rules, being specific and intentional, because the mentality and my mentality is basically, if you want your dog there, we're going to have to make sure that we just put a couple guidelines around where you can go and where you can't go. Health code applies where you're serving food publicly in an indoor space, which is why we, like in Manhattan, we can't bring our dogs into the restaurants, but we can be outside.
Right.
So we can absolutely be outside. We can be in like a bridal suite, a wedding suite, a foyer, a hallway. There's no health code violations in those respects. But with that said, I understand if a venue has any concerns, like any of the botanical gardens that we go to, there's certain areas that they don't want dogs on because they don't want any urination. And there's no way for us to prevent that, so we just don't go there.
Sure.
But so long as we know exactly where we can go, where we can be ahead of time, it makes the day much easier. And I wish venues would specify that in their contracts from the onset.
Yeah.
So when I say this, when there is pushback from the venue, think about it from their standpoint. They're afraid of all the bad mishaps. They're afraid of all the bad things that they have had happen. And they've had bad dogs, unfortunately.
Sure.
We've all heard the story of the couple that brought a dog and then all of a sudden the dog chewed through some, like vintage furniture, peed on, a $1,000 rug, all those things.
Right.
We don't want to add fear to the venue, but we want to understand, what are their fears? Why do they have any fear around having a dog there, and what can we do about it?
Yeah.
A lot of venues will initially, I have found, say, no dogs inside. And then what happens when it rains? What happens if it's a 100-degree day?
Right.
Still, I find venues are not heartless when it comes to that, especially the maitre d's and the venue managers. It's like, no, you can come inside. And especially when we show up, they're like, oh, wait, this is not, a 14-year-old person that they pulled off the street type of thing. This is an actual pet sitter. They sent our insurance certificate and they sent a timeline. We're not worried.
Yeah. Yeah.
So my advice is, when you do get any pushback from your venue, go back to them, email them, and just say, look, I understand there's always, a history of something bad that happened. What can I do to help appease that fear? I'm considering working with professional pet sitters. Do we need an insurance certificate? What can we do in terms of just having the dog there for photos or for the ceremony?
Yeah.
And what can I do to help appease any fears? Do we need a contract modification? Do we need something else?
Right.
So, but a healthy pushback in the sense of like, what can I do to help appease your fears? I understand. I get it. And I also tell couples to if you're already into the booking process and you've booked your venue already, and then you say, I want my dog there, you should have brought it up ahead of time when you were touring the venue.
Totally.
So apologize for that ahead of time. It's generally, that conversation goes a little bit better when you say, look, I should have brought this up ahead of time.
Yes.
But with that said, I would really like to have my dog there. I promise you, this is probably the fourth or fifth conversation that week that the venue manager has had about having a dog there.
Oh, yeah.
And there's a bit of a difference between, let's talk about how I can help you, versus, you asshole, I want my dog there.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I mean, we always talk about it here, like the communication aspect. Just treat people like a human being. I know there's high emotions involved, but if anyone is in the early stages of planning, that is something to think about. Like, who do you want there? Obviously, guests, how many people, but do you want your pet there? And that's something that when you're vetting venues, you should really be asking those questions.
Yep.
But the whole venue thing, it's all about assessing risk. Like, people don't do it as much anymore, but we always used to see like the sparklers with the first dance, and that's a risk. But it comes with a DJ company who has the insurance and and all of those things. So I think if you can explain it to the venue in that way, like I've hired Pawfect For You. This is literally what they do. Like, read the reviews. Veronica can vouch for me,
Oh, yeah. I just had this conversation with a venue in Virginia, and I completely understand it. I feel for the owner. She's had a few bad experiences, but I said, look, whatever rules you have, we'll follow.
Yeah.
But it's an English bulldog. I just want to make sure it's the end of September. The weather can go many different ways. If it's a hot day, I just want to make sure we can go inside somewhere. If not, and if it's a decent enough day, we'll just stay there for the ceremony and then drive back to the house. But the house was like an hour and a half away from the venue, and we were originally booked to stay on site. anything we could do. And then there was an Airbnb nearby that the venue owner also owned that the couples were getting ready in. So they said, so long as they pay a cleaning fee, okay.
Okay. We
All
love
right, that's
that.
better.
That's something else to consider too. So especially if you're traveling, how is your dog getting there? Are you
Yes.
taking the dog? Like, are the accommodations pet friendly?
Exactly.
So you need to really, really
Yeah.
do your research on
Yep.
these things beforehand.
Exactly. And the same concept applies to hotels as well. A
Yeah.
lot of times I see couples that reach out and they're like, oh, my hotel isn't dog friendly. I'll tell you this too. Sparta, you're a New Jersey girl, Sparta, New Jersey.
Yeah.
There's lots of great venues up there. We have my second sitter, who was my aunt, that really covers that area for me.
So fun.
But we get regular calls from all the venues in the area. And I'd say 5-6 years ago, so often it's couples in the city that are going out and the hotel's not pet friendly.
Mhm.
And we don't have kennel licensing. So the only thing we can't do is watch dogs in our own home. But we can watch dogs in your hotel and Airbnb. We can pick up and drop off at a boarding facility. Sometimes we're picking up and dropping off at rover sitters. But a lot of times couples are like, how am I going to make this happen? So I sent an email to a lot of the hotels in the area and I was like, is there any way that you could take a look at your policy and just, think about it? It's an additional revenue stream for you. Charge a fee, put some rules in place. I am happy to help go through any rules. Now they're all pet friendly.
I love that. I love that.
It was like I never got a response, and I was kind of like peeved about it for a while, and then I started getting couples that were reaching out and they're like, "Oh yeah, we're staying at the Hilton in right off of Interstate 80." I was like, "Oh, I guess that email finally did work."
I guess they kind of owe me a little bit.
They charge $75 to have the pet if you have your pet at your hotel, but look, it's a great revenue stream for them. It's a great way for couples to then not have as many headaches and stressors through the process. So I say that with if your hotel is not pet friendly, again, a little healthy pushback might be good.
Yeah.
Ask them, any exception, can you pay a fee and what rules need to be followed? Some hotels even actually mandate that a sitter stay with them. And that's great for us.
Totally.
And great for the couple because then the dog does get involved in the wedding day and we just go back to the hotel. We stay with the dog until they get back.
And people just want to know that their pet is being cared for. So there's two paths. There's the one that's like, okay, we can't really fully have the dog involved because the venue won't let us, but we want him or her with us on the day for photos beforehand, things like that. So you mentioned kennel or like a doggy hotel. Since I am not a dog person, I don't know what is proper protocol. Like, are they acceptable? Are they okay to use? And how to vet them?
Yep. Doggy hotels are definitely, I think they're very good in certain, depending on the couples and the dog. Dog hotels and doggy daycares are great for socialization, first of all.
Yeah.
I always advocate for them. But with that said, though, not every dog is going to acclimate very well to socialization. It just doesn't do well in those environments.
Yeah.
So if the attempts at socialization haven't worked, doggy hotels, not such a good idea.
Right.
Sometimes you might find a particular kennel or boarding facility in the area wherever you're getting married that might offer private kenneling. So basically, it's kind of like big cages or big kind of crates that they'll stay in. But I mean, you really have to assess whether or not it's like that's how you want your dog to spend their day type of thing.
Right.
It's basically a smaller version of like your apartment, but still.
Right. Especially if it's a multi-day event and you're traveling somewhere.
Exactly.
And it's just a lot for them. Okay, so then the other route is venue says yes, dog is able to come.
Yep.
And that's going to look different for everyone. So let's start with having the dog involved in photos and ceremony. So what kind of roles have you seen dog in?
Generally, it's kind of like ring bearer, a flower girl when it comes to the ceremony. Photos, those are not to say, but fairly straightforward.
Yeah.
I will say, though, I always tell couples buffer time. This kind of sounds a little bit ridiculous, but when we first arrive at a venue, if we're going to be part of the first look, then we want to show up about half an hour beforehand because we want to go say hi to you first, partner second, and then we will have a discussion about what will first look look like? Will we be standing off to the side holding the dog, or do you want the dog part of the first look? And we have a little discussion about that as we get through our detailed planning. But I say buffer time, and I also say we want to kind of do the introductions ahead of time before the first look, because again, think about it from the dog standpoint. As soon as your dog sees you, your dog is going to act as though they haven't seen you in 110 years.
Right.
It's the typical like, oh my God, my parents are here. I haven't seen them. Let me do all my jumping, get all crazy. Here's my butt going all over the place.
Right.
So we always allocate at least 5 minutes for that.
Smart.
And then on top of it, we always do a little bit of what we call light grooming. So there's usually like a little eye boogie wipe up.
Okay.
We want to make the dogs, you are paying a couple $1,000s for photos. To wipe up any eye gunk out of the dog's eyes is not a problem for us, but definitely something that needs to be kind of considered. Anything around their muzzles, anything around their paws. Are we changing out their collars, harnesses, leashes? I just had a call a few nights ago, and the groom actually like kind of nudged the bride, and he's like, "Are we getting a new leash?" And I was like, "I did hear that, and yes, you are." I'm going to answer that for you.
That is something that people probably don't think about, though. Yeah. And like even the grooming schedule of your dog and making sure that he or she is like cleaned up really nice. And you mentioned the eye boogies. That's something that I would never think of, but they won't need to be polished. It's an important day.
Last thing you want to see is like this big chunk of whatever coming out of some, and it happens a lot with our dogs.
Sure.
A lot of times pet parents are always like, oh yeah, we just wipe them with our fingers. When they wake up in the morning, I do it for my dog. But coming into the wedding day, it's kind of like, let's make sure that there's no like this runny black stuff coming out of their eye when you have professional pictures.
Totally.
And on top of it too, when we really get into the detailed planning, I do ask couples, well, do you use any specific wipes, or is a cotton towel okay?
Yeah.
Does your dog tape bottled water? Does your dog tape tap water?
Mm-hmm.
You would be surprised where I'd say about 25% of my couples say they'll provide bottled because they're just not sure, tap. We have a couple people where there's a couple dogs, different allergies. So we have to be conscious of what we're giving them, what treats they're providing. We've gone to a no extra policy actually this year because a couple times like guests will come over and they might have food from the cocktail hour, and it's like, I'm just not sure. So now I just put on standard disclaimer on the timelines. No extra food will be given unless it's approved by the couple that day or it's provided to us. And then there's all sorts of different quirks that go into caring for a pet that you don't realize, like you said earlier, on a daily basis, but that factor into the wedding day. And we tease that out through kind of all these different questions. And you'd be surprised where people are always like, oh, I didn't think of that.
I bet. I know, because all of these things are running through my mind now. So what are some ways that people can prep their dog in advance? Because I think that there's so much prep involved, even for bride and groom, like, getting comfortable in front of the camera and like making sure they're posing okay, and prepping your dog for something completely unexpected that you can't clearly communicate to him or her.
The best ways, honestly, are understand your pet's behavior, like really get to know how they do in large environments around like large crowds, loud music, because those are the things that we would be concerned of that day.
Yeah.
What are their highest motivators? Like, don't give me a milk bone on the wedding day. I know most dogs like milk bones. Some dogs don't, but even still, anything where I generally recommend against any kind of hard biscuit treat during the day, just because if we're trying to get a photo, your dog doesn't need to be licking the ground from crumbs for giving the dog a reward and trying to get him to focus on the camera.
Right.
So really get to know what your dog's highest motivators are. We want you to supply that for the wedding day. At least we do. I know other companies operate a little bit differently, but you want to know what your dog's highest motivators are, and that's going to get that quick picture, and it's going to able to keep us on that timeline.
Yes.
And would keep us quiet during the ceremony too.
Yes.
But then also, if you do get any attire, if you get a little tux, if you get a little dress, a tutu, even a pearl necklace, try it on ahead of time. Make sure your dog is comfortable with it. Make sure it's not going to freak them out. Make sure that they can walk around and they feel comfortable walking around. And I think those are really the two main things that you can do.
Yeah.
In order to make sure that the dog has a positive experience for the day.
Love it. Oh, love it. Makes so much sense. So in terms of walking down the aisle, you said sometimes we have a ring bearer or a flower girl. Are there couples who want their dog to walk alone down the aisle? Is that a possibility?
In certain circumstances, yes.
Okay.
We have done it, and we do actually modify our contract if we're outside because we have a no off leash outside contract in our contract.
No off leash outside. Okay, makes
Yeah.
sense. Mm-hmm.
And again, it depends on the venue, depends on the day, and it depends on the type of dog. I don't recommend taking a dog off leash outside. There's just too many variables, and most dogs do have a propensity to go after squirrels and chipmunks and birds and everything else. I've had one couple back, I think it was 2016 or 17. It was an English bulldog up in Connecticut, and she was like, "Oh, he's fine. He can go off leash." And I'm like, I just saw like 15 bunnies go past, and if you knew the strength it took to hold that dog back, I'm not taking this dog off leash.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there something in there that you kind of know? At the end of the day, it's kind of going to be our call because we don't want to ruin your wedding day.
Yeah. And sometimes we do go into even just the lineup with that kind of, 50-50 type of thing. If we're outside, rural venue, not near a main road, and you want the dog to walk down the aisle and it's a low energy breed, not one that typically will go run off and has a decent history of off-leash commands, then yes, let's have a discussion about it.
Yeah.
But if we're going to be outside, we had one wedding a few years ago where it was one of the vineyards out on Long Island on the North Fork.
Okay.
But you know how close they are to the road.
Yes.
I was like, whether they set up for the ceremony, you are literally 100 feet from 25A.
Yeah.
We're not doing that.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, but it's in my contract to say no off leash. I don't want to deal with the liability.
For sure.
Let alone anything going wrong for you guys that day. So dog on leash to go, unless the ceremony moves inside and the venue's okay with us taking the leash off for that particular instance, then yes, we can do it. But where that venue is and where the ceremony location is related to the road, not a good idea.
Right.
Other times, if it's let's say a 12-year-old dog who is arthritic, not such that I could deal with. So it does depend on lots of different variables. I do advise against it though, for the most part, just because there are too many variables for the day and there's no way to replicate it ahead of time to see how that dog will behave going down the aisle.
Totally.
I do think it's always super cute to have somebody walk them down.
Yeah.
We've had a few times where it's like the groom will walk them down. We have one coming up where it's the groom and his mom. He's going to escort his mom and the dog and then stay up there until the bride comes down, and they'll have their little moment, and then the dog will get handed off to her sitter. And there's so much that goes into the ceremony plans. Whereas the sitter sitting, we have a reserved seat sign in our timeline that gets printed out. And I have an instruction on the timeline that says the sitter is going to go put the reserved seat sign on the seat at this point in time. And we'll talk about, should we be on partner 1 side or partner 2 side? I always ask for a seat at the exit aisle side, because if we do need to take a quick exit out, that's easy enough.
Smart.
As opposed to being in the on the aisle, like the center aisle side. We talked through which of the partners' side should it be. We just had a timeline last night where the bride was like, I want the line of sight to the dogs. I was like, all right, that answers that question. So we're going to be on partner 2 side.
Happy wife, happy life.
Exactly.
So we go through ceremony and either sitter or someone special in the wedding party is going to walk dog down the aisle. And then, during ceremony, maybe they'll stand up there. Maybe they're taking a seat.
Exactly.
So for photos, I know that people are going to want their dogs in a lot of their photos, but not all of them.
Exactly.
So during that period, what does that kind of look like for the sitter and the dog?
Again, dependent on kind of the time frame. If we're going to be there for first look, we're probably going to be doing a little bit more sitting down and just rest and relaxation before the ceremony starts. And I always tell people this too. If your ceremony starts at 5:30, we'll get there at 4. Realistically, that's going to give you 40 to 45 minutes of photos with the dog, not an hour and a half.
Yeah.
Half an hour before the ceremony starts, you're going to tell your couple, go back to the wedding suite, little rest, touch up your hair and makeup. We'll take the dog for a pre-ceremony walk, give them an opportunity to lift a leg or pop a squat before they go down the aisle.
Relieve themselves.
It's not a perfect science, but it has worked.
Sure.
And then we know ceremony lineup is generally about 15 to 10 minutes before the actual start. So we'll line up as well. But between that half an hour before your ceremony starts, there's really no photos being taken. Now, if we show up, let's say we're there for the first look, and the first look might be 2.5 hours before the ceremony start. We're probably only going to still get about an hour of photos with the dog, and then they'll usually tell us go back, hang out in the suite, and really it's just time to sit there, pet them, play on our phones, read a book. We'll put on some music, play with the dog. I do ask what toys they like. Sometimes people will ask take them for a walk if it's in, depending on the venue location, if there's like a hiking trail or a specific dog trail to take them on. But yeah, there is a little bit of downtime in those respects. But if you want your dog there for first look, then yes, the end result is a little bit more sitting closer to the ceremony time. And then usually the ceremonies are fairly, the ceremony is what it is. We're sitting in the seat. We're trying to keep the dog quiet. We'll work with the couple ahead of time to understand what might keep the dog quiet during the ceremony. I've actually had 2 couples this year tell me, play the game of leave it. So take a piece of chicken or their favorite treat, put it down on the either on the ground or like on your knee, and say, okay, wait. And you'll be amazed at how many dogs can actually just sit there salivating until you say, okay, take it.
Wow.
And then repeat all through the ceremony.
Oh my gosh.
Yep.
So a well-trained dog, it goes a long way.
Yep. And especially their highest motivators, they will sit there and wait until you give them the release word. So we'll do our best to follow whatever typically works for that particular pet. And then after ceremony, again, sometimes we're handing the leash off and they recess back down the aisle. Sometimes we're leaving like 2 or 3 minutes before the ceremony ends, and then we'll meet the couple down after their big kiss at the end of the aisle, and then they'll just like take another photo with the dog.
Yeah.
Sometimes we're completely skipping the recession altogether. Sometimes we even just walk down the aisle and then leave from the venue. We've said our goodbyes ahead of time because we know that the dog was just not going to make it through the ceremony.
Makes sense. So do you ever have dogs stay through cocktail hour and or reception?
Yep. Sometimes the cocktail hour, and again, we really play it by ear during the day or see how it is during the day, because weather's going to factor into it. And again, now this is where the health code comes into play, because if we are inside, then we cannot be in the same room where the food is being served. So if we have one of those like dual spaces where it's kind of just more like one room is where the food is being served, if it's a buffet style, let's say, and then there's another room where it's just kind of like rest, sitting, couches, or like a hallway or a foyer, we can hang out there and people can come up to us, take some photos, pet the dog. So again, it's kind of a 50-50 play it by ear and see how, like, where we can be versus what the weather is, versus where the actual food is being served. All those things factor in. But for the most part, I just put a blanket statement on the timeline that the couple and the dog, or the sitter and the dog, will follow the couple as they mingle with guests. And then during our detailed planning, I just say, obviously play it by ear. The sitter has eyes 24/7 on the dog. She'll let you know if there's anything like anxiety or shaking or something that we are concerned about.
Yes.
That would be like, hey, maybe we just go in a room and do a little 30-minute nap type of thing.
Sure.
Or you guys just let the sitter know, like, stay here or follow us here. Because it is a nice time, though, for couples to be able to turn around and be like, oh, and this is my baby. And they're right there.
Yeah, yeah. So when you're in a situation like a cocktail hour or a reception where there's lots of people around, and let's say we have a guest who is maybe fearful of dogs or allergic to dogs, how do you navigate those kinds of things?
Great question. And it's actually one of the questions on our questionnaire as well.
Okay.
So we ask ahead of time. We bring that answer right into the timeline. If it's a yes, and if there is somebody, then I'll add another line on our timeline for the sitter to specifically ask the couple who that person is, so we know to keep a distance.
Okay.
And if there is any allergy, I really haven't seen anything that's like life-threatening allergy. It's generally more somebody is allergic.
Usually if they're petting the dog, that's like.
Exactly. And they'll tell me like, oh, that person's going to take a Claritin or something ahead of time.
Yeah.
So long as we know, we will just do our best to keep as much distance as possible. But by the same token, that person who's allergic is also keeping a distance.
Right. So it does make it a little bit easier.
Yeah.
Especially outdoors.
Plus,
like
you're communicating it ahead of time.
Right.
It's so not to say awful, but it is in some respects not to, if you know that you have any wedding party members or you know that you have a guest that is allergic, just notify them ahead of time and say, look, I have a professional pet sitter and we've told the pet sitter that you don't like dogs, and that's completely fine. Not everybody has to love their dogs.
Yeah.
Or that they're allergic, so they'll keep a distance. And that shows respect to your guests. That shows you're openly communicating, hey, just want to let you know. Also, the dog's leaving. Like right after the ceremony, dog is leaving, so it's not a concern through cocktail hour, definitely not a concern through reception for the most part. Every now and again, we stay through reception, but it's generally where we just do bridal party introductions and maybe be part of the first dance.
Yeah.
But again, that's where the health code violations come into play. Some venues allow it because it's not as though they're actively serving food.
Right.
And depending on the locality, I always defer to the venue rules because they know better than I do. But if they're not actively serving food, we can at least be part of the dance. But generally, there's so much food going around in the reception, and there's just so much going on too.
Yes.
It really does make for a little bit of a hard thing for a dog to make it through the full thing.
Sure.
Sometimes we've gone back for cake cutting, where the dog has its own cake. And there's it's a nice way to include them. Sometimes we'll stay on site in like the wedding suite, and it's nice for the couple to go back and be like, oh, this is my stress relief. This is lowering my blood pressure right now.
Yes, because it's all eyes on you. That's a big complaint that couples have. They have a lot of anxiety about the focus being on them. And for some people, their pet is an emotional support pet.
It is. Yep.
Is that, I don't want to say a loophole because I feel like that's a dirty way to say it, but if you do legitimately have an emotional support pet, does that override the health code thing?
Nope.
No, okay.
The only override to the health code is if it's a true service pet.
Got it.
At that point, there's a lot of different ways to handle it. Generally, if it's a true service pet, there has to be some sort of disability. Sometimes there's not disabilities that are visible, but the venue has the right to ask what disability is this pet serving.
Yeah, that's why I feel like it's unfortunate because I have friends who I love and it's all with good intention, but the emotional support cert is abused a little bit. And I feel like it does really need to be reserved for people who have the invisible disability where that pet really is the support.
Yeah. And there are people I have seen, and we've both experienced it, the nervous bride or the nervous groom, where it's kind of like just having that dog there is stress relieving enough.
Yes.
And in that respect, I've had some couples that say it and they don't have the emotional support cert.
Right.
So in those cases, I don't think the certifications really matter too much.
Yeah.
There are some hotels that ask for it still. In that case, it serves, multiple purposes. And if you really want your dog there, you want your dog there to, because it is helping you in some fashion. It's making you feel better by having your dog there.
Right.
So I think in those circumstances, the emotional cert side of things is valid. But when it comes to venues, I think you're just going to end up causing more drama and pissing more people off if you're like, well, my dog is certified and there's not anything that you can follow on with the discussion if asked. And the venue's going to have the right to ask if you go in saying, well, I need my dog for support.
Yeah.
Or I need my dog because it's a service dog. If you need your dog because you're blind or there's any other, we've had a number of service dogs before. I do say though, even though they're a service dog, a couple still don't want them through the reception because they don't want them working. There's not a need for them to be working. There's not a need for assistance when you have so many other people around you also helping you.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. I think I definitely forget. I don't know if other people do, but service dogs are working and they're on the clock at that point. So a lot of people might want to actually give them a break during that time and kind of relax.
That the true owners, when it comes to the service side of things, they know that and they respect it. And it's more along the lines of like, I don't need the dog to perform a service right now for me because there's so many other people around them. It's not like you're just sitting in your apartment and you have to go grocery shopping.
Right.
It's a much different ballpark in a wedding scenario. And it's kind of like, why do I have to have my dog working when I can just have my guests help me and I can enjoy the day and the dog can go back and chow down all the prosciutto that he wants.
Makes total sense. Makes total sense. Another question I have for you, it's something that we touched on when we were on the phone, but different breeds. Do you find that different breeds work better or worse at a wedding, or are there certain things to consider with, let's say, a poodle versus a pug?
Exactly. We do see a tremendous trend with like golden retrievers, labs, golden doodles, Australian shepherds. The Australian shepherds, even though every time somebody with an Australian shepherd reaches out, they're just like, well, he's high energy.
Yeah.
Yes. So that's a consideration. We don't want the dog there for the entire day. First look, I can entertain, but cocktail hour, that's going to be probably not. I'm not going to recommend that. I mean, it'd be great. I could make more money by saying it, but it's just going to end up being a headache for everybody involved.
Sure.
So there's those considerations with particular breeds. And then there's other breeds too that they just don't do well in public, like cats.
Yeah.
We've done over 1,000 weddings. We've had 3 cats.
Wow.
And they just don't do well in public. You don't see cats walking down on the street, and that's just the nature of the breeds. And the same thing goes for certain breeds. We don't see a ton of Shiba Inus. We don't see a lot of Jack Russells. We don't see a lot of every now and again I get a Great Pyrenees mix, but not a purebred. These are typically the breeds where they're just not very social, and they're also very overprotective of their owners.
Yeah.
And in the case of a wedding day, you've got tons of people coming up and saying hi, and all you hear in the background is just barking, barking, barking.
Yeah.
Couples like that, couples that know their dog, and they know their breeds, and they know these are typical breed tendencies. Again, they're not the ones calling.
Right. No, that makes total sense. Before we move on, because we do a premarital counseling session every episode. Before we move on to premarital counseling, is there anything that sticks out that I didn't mention that you really want dog owners to know about including a dog on their wedding day?
I think those are kind of like the big tips. Like venue is always going to be a part of the consideration. So if your venue has a no dog policy, we talked about the pushback. We talked about like how to handle that. There's definitely ways to work around that. We might want to consider doing photos at a different location, photos at an offsite location, photos at the hotel, Airbnb, and then obviously logistics play into it. But I always recommend couples definitely start thinking through not only what are your venue restrictions, what are your logistic restrictions, but also your ideal vision. What do you want to happen?
Right.
What is your ideal way of including your day? If every star in this world aligned, how would it work out? And then from there, you can figure contingency plans. So those are kind of like my big 3 tips is venue, logistics, and ideal vision.
Makes sense. Makes perfect sense. It's like anything in planning a wedding and figuring out your timelines and the way you want your design to be, your flowers, your food, your music. Including the dog is a big logistical part of the day. So I think you covered so much. I think this is so informative. We do have a premarital counseling session question that is pretty pointed, and I think you're the perfect person to answer it. So let us get into it. Today's submission, we're going to call her Sally. I think I use Sally a lot. We always keep it anonymous. This one's not really bad. I don't think she would care if we use her name, but we do keep it anonymous. If anyone ever wants to write into premarital counseling, they can always email. It's in the show notes. But Sally is a spring 2025 bride. And this is her message. She says, "Hi, we are getting married next spring. Our 20-pound corgi, Ziggy, is our whole world, but our venue is indoors and will not permit dogs on site. We have 2 issues. 1, any family member that we would typically trust to watch her will be at the wedding. And she's not super comfortable around other dogs, so bringing her to a hotel is not exactly an option. 2, we want to figure out a way to make Ziggy a special part of our day. Suggestions on both would be appreciated. Cheers."
Awesome. I love this question. It touches upon so many different things. And to be honest, she actually has more than 2 challenges listed here. There's a few. So we can we're going to break it down, talk through that, and also send a picture of this adorable corgi. Oh my God.
Yes, we need a picture. Yes. I'm going to request a picture of Ziggy, and then we'll post it with some of the episode clips.
Adorable. So definitely I have to give this bride grace because you're thinking about this so far in advance. This is so good. So you're absolutely right where you should be. I've seen so many couples, and I think I mentioned this in the email, where they don't realize that basically everybody you know and trust is at your wedding until 2 or 3 months before the wedding.
Totally.
And now we are 2 seasons ahead. This is good. So kudos for her for that. Challenge number 1 really is that your dog won't permit, the venue doesn't permit dogs on site. My first piece of advice, a little bit of pushback, healthy pushback to the venue. Also find out why. Why don't they allow the dogs on site? And then maybe from there, the conversation can flow to, well, how can I help appease any of those fears?
Right.
And again, just keep in mind that the venue is probably having this conversation with many couples. And my guess is by some point in the next 2 or 3 years, they're going to have to make a modification. And I also say this with the caveat of, like, I had a venue in New Jersey, I want to say 2 or 3 years ago. They kept telling the couple, no dogs, no dogs, no dogs. Instagram that week. They put it a picture of the dog.
Yeah, what the heck?
Yeah, like we're not the only ones here. So a little bit of healthy pushback, I think, is very well warranted in this case.
Mm-hmm.
If they still say no, obviously have to deal with it.
Sure.
Are there photos that can be done off-site? Can they be done at an Airbnb, a hotel, anything along those lines? The second challenge, obviously you're going to need a sitter because everybody you know and trust is going to be at the wedding.
Yeah.
So in terms of vetting sitters, definitely, I don't know if they're in our service area. If this bride is,
yeah, she didn't share where she was getting married. So I was like,
fine.
You're perfect for Pawfect For You, but maybe you are. But let's say that they're not in your service area.
I would even say still feel free to reach out to me. If they're not in our service area, we can possibly recommend somebody in a different area.
Amazing.
We do have, during the pandemic, actually, I reached out a couple other like bigger wedding day pet care companies throughout the US. And I was like, hey, can we do a little like powwow, like Zoom sessions and just talk through like all of our challenges? Because there's no support group out there for like wedding pet sitters.
Yes. I feel like that, I mean, I hate to talk about the pandemic, but sometimes it's warranted. But it really did bring vendors in the same arena together. Like at the time, I was with a venue and all the area venues were like, what are you doing? How are you navigating this, that, the other? So it really brought people together in a kind of beautiful way, even though it was like the worst thing ever. But continue.
Yeah. So, I mean, I know other companies that operate on the West Coast. I know companies that operate throughout the Midwest. Happy to make recommendations if I know somebody. And if I don't, then my next recommendation would be troll your Facebook groups, ask the venue, ask your photographer if they know anybody.
Yeah.
Challenge 3 here, your dog's not super comfortable around other dogs. That is a very vital piece of information to tell your pet sitter. Even if your dog is not good around other dogs, there still could be an interaction at a hotel or on a street if you're walking. That's very good, and it's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
Some dogs just don't do well with other dogs. That's fine, so long as we know ahead of time.
Mm-hmm.
Challenge 4, obviously you can't go in and out of a daycare. So then again, you're kind of falling back on your logistics. Is there... Like, do you need to have a pet sitter at the hotel? Do you need to have a pet sitter at the Airbnb or at your apartment if you live near the venue, or maybe mom's house if you live near the venue too? Something along those lines. So no daycare, not the end of the world, but you're just going to have to make sure that you've got some sort of care during the wedding.
Mm-hmm.
And challenge number 5 is really... you want Ziggy part of the special day. Lots of different ways that you can make that happen. Think through your current logistics. Are you getting ready at a certain location? Where are you getting ready? Where's your partner getting ready? Sometimes in the hotels, it's actually very nice where we just float between the 2 rooms.
Yeah.
We get some photos with partner 1 and then photos with partner 2 and then go back to partner 1, then go back to partner 2, and then we follow partner 2 out to the first look location.
Yes. And you still have those special portraits. When you look back, it's like, oh, yeah, Ziggy was a part of the day. And
Yep, exactly. So think through the day. Corgis make excellent wedding guests.
Okay.
They generally are, they're a stubborn breed. That's what they're known for, but they're cute as ever. They are always very treat motivated, so it's very easy to get them to look at the camera. Also, advice that we were talking about earlier about those treats: get to know Ziggy's highest motivators. I have a Corgi German Shepherd myself.
Oh my gosh! Oh,
so
what do you call? It's Jake Bear, right?
Yep.
What do you call him? What's his title?
What is he? Chief Pup in Charge.
I love it. Chief Pup in Charge.
And
Jake
he very
Bear.
much is. Everything, my house, my truck, everything is his.
Adorable.
Yep.
I love it.
My bed is this 23-pound dog takes up the entire bed.
Oh my God, that's
the queen
great.
size bed, and he's somehow or another. It's like both legs end up
Spread eagle.
Yeah, I'll be in
Snow
the middle of the
angel.
night, like in my tiny little corner in the bed. But with
That's so
that said,
funny.
he is my absolute love, my firstborn. We just celebrated 12. I've had him since he was 1,
Oh,
and for his 12th birthday. And many of the clients, I think, can kind of resound with this. I cooked him steak, filet mignon, black and blue, with butter sauce and 12 candles.
it sounds delicious. I want that for my birthday. Screw the cake. I want the filet mignon.
I know. We had a piece too. It was delicious.
Oh, it sounds so good. Oh, that's really cute. And
Yeah.
it just goes to show what an important part of the family the dog is. And I think you gave great solutions for Ziggy. Sally, send a picture of Ziggy. I'll send an
Yes.
email to remind you because we want to share. But yeah, I think that was super great advice. And I just want to finish with our after party, which is the way we end every episode. So they're just like fun wedding questions. They don't have to be specific to you, just, whatever kind of comes to mind. So first question is, what is your honeymoon hotspot?
I was really thinking through this one. I personally love like a cabin in the woods with a hot tub, a fireplace,
Oh, yeah.
hiking trail. Like that is my quintessential. I would absolutely love that. Although haven't really done that because I have a 2-year-old.
Yeah, that makes things
Hot
a
tubs and
little
fireplaces.
bit difficult. Yeah,
Yeah.
but like upstate New York,
Yes.
yeah, really.
Poconos,
Mhm.
Catskills, yes.
I've been thinking about that lately too. I'm like, I want a little winter getaway.
Yes.
It's underrated. I like that answer. Okay, what song is going to get you on the dance floor at a wedding?
The one that always does is Who Let the Dogs Out.
Oh wow, that's perfect. That's on the money. And what a great song. The
Yeah.
Bahaman?
I think it's the one that every couple always picks too. And it's like if we're part of the like bridal party introductions,
Yes.
it's the Who Let the Dogs Out, and sure we're coming out the floor.
That's adorable. That's a really good idea if anyone wants to steal that. Okay, what hors d'oeuvre will you never pass up at a wedding?
Just like a dog, chicken and cheese. I love cheese and anything like chicken, buffalo chicken, chicken wings. I absolutely love.
Gorgeous. What is your signature cocktail or mocktail?
I love a mojito.
Any season?
Any season. Mint, all the flavors.
Yes.
All of them. They just something about mint and seltzer and a little bit of sweetness. I
So
absolutely
refreshing.
love.
Absolutely. If you could invite any living dream guest to your wedding, who would it be?
I'd have to say Marcy Bloom. I would love
that answer. And maybe she could plan everything too.
I would just love to sit for like a half an hour and get into this woman's mind because, I know what goes into getting a dog at a wedding and then let alone everything else that goes into the events that she produces.
Yeah.
I'm just like fathomed with my timelines are like 6-7 pages long sometimes. I can't that has to be like a 200-page timeline for some of these really extravagant, fancy, amazing weddings.
I'm trying to get her on actually. I'm like fascinated. Yeah, I feel
And
the
then
same
she
way.
wrote a
She's
book to top it off too. It's
Yeah.
like, whoa.
a phenomenal talent. That's a great guest. No one's ever said that one. Okay, and then what is one practical piece of advice that you could give to any bride planning her wedding?
David and I were actually talking about this morning beforehand. Write your own vows. I love just sitting through the ceremony, listening to what their intention is. I learned so much about the couple.
Yeah.
Just hearing what they say through their vows, why they're there, what they're promising to each other. It's not only just so sentimental, but it's also a really great way to incorporate your dog into.
Of course, absolutely.
And then everybody looks over and turns around to your dog and they're like, oh.
Yeah.
But I definitely recommend writing your own vows. I think it is a very nice way to showcase the intention and the love behind the day.
Very good advice. Veronica, thank you so much for being here. Where can everyone find Pawfect For You?
Across every social media, we're all at Pawfect For You. PAWFECT
Fabulous. Thank you so much for doing this. This was so fun.
Thank you for having us.
Yay! Thanks for tuning into the Pre Nup. Don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform or on the Love Stories TV YouTube channel. Follow at _pre_nup and at Love Stories TV on Instagram for more. Have feedback or suggestions for the next episode? Feel free to reach out to us at podcast@lovestoriestv.com.